welcome to my talk. This is Riff.CC. Our slogan is Free the World's Culture. And our other slogan is now, everything in Riff is intentional, except for all the things that aren't intentional. So with that, just since it seems fitting for what's, what is Riff.CC? So Riff is a nonprofit project that started back in 2009, and we basically decided that it was a little bit unfair that there are people out there making content and art for the world to see, and if they really want a bunch of people to see it, they pretty much have to pay money or put it on a platform with tons and tons of ads. Which is fair enough, because doing this sort of work is really, really hard at scale, which you'll see in a minute. We have interesting problems. But that was basically the mission back in 2009, and back then streaming wasn't really that hot. It was all about the downloads, it was all about the BitTorrents. And over time, we've seen services like Netflix, and then later on Stan and Disney Plus and so on, start to become, the way that people expect to use content. So we're a non-profit project building. I'm just going to read off the screen, I'm sorry. We're building the open source streaming platform of the future. It's decentralized, powerful, free, and powered by what we believe to be the lowest cost content distribution ever created. There are no advertisements, there's no catch, and soon there will be no center. And what we mean by that is that we're basically putting plans into place that the entire mission could carry on without us if we decided to turn evil, or if we just ran out of money, or if, Wings finally succumbs to the colds that he has. Which brings up the question, what is content distribution and why should I care? It's just a fancy way of saying music, movies, games, books, scientific data, all kinds of stuff is content. It's pretty much anything you can imagine that you can package into a file and shove over the internet. All of it needs to be moved around the internet, and to an extent, all of it needs to be enjoyed. Everything that people create has value to someone, even if it's sometimes just to the person that created it. So, welcome to our mission. We're here to free the world's culture. It's our mission from the start. It's taken us a while to be able to put it into words. But we like to think that everything we do basically revolves around that idea of taking what is already free and making it freer and more available. So, in short, we try not to be jerks. We really, really try. We are open source AF. Everything we've ever built is open source, and essentially as long as I'm contributing heavily, that will probably never change. We go with the most permissive licenses we're legally allowed to go with. So MIT license pretty much means you can take our code and you can do anything you want with it as long as you keep our name on the damn thing and you don't use it for anything too evil. Did I lose you guys? I cannot hear you guys anymore.
Yep.
Okay. Am I good? Cool. All right. So present, not full screen. Did I lose you again? No. Okay. Sorry. All right. So yeah, everything we do is open, and soon we're going to be even more open, which is cool. So who am I? I'm Benjamin Arntzen. I'm the founder. I'm an open source enthusiast. I'm a programmer. Digital adventure, or whatever that means, and I'm a maker. I work in supercomputing by day, it's my day job, and Riff.CC is what I do pretty much every other minute that I'm not with my family or friends. So we're free, we don't have any ads, and really, genuinely, there is no evil turn monetized strategy. So where does the money actually come from to do something like this? And for now, the answer is me. It comes out of my pocket, my salary. It comes out of my stupid crypto mining stuff. And yeah, that is what it is. I've spent a ton of resources and money to try to get to this point. I suppose I've given up a lot. I obviously haven't really, but it's certainly been a long road. I said we started in 2009, December 2009 to be fair, and that is pretty much true, but we were in hibernation for a good chunk of it. We essentially spent a very long time trying to figure out how to do this as cheaply as possible so we wouldn't have to compromise our values. But I'm very, very happy to say publicly for the first time that this is the first time in the project where we think we are sustainable for the foreseeable future, and the seas are calming, and we're very, very happy about that. And I'm particularly happy about it because this is my baby. But this is a very long road ahead. So how do we manage to be free? And why are we not insane to try to be free? And the answer is that we basically have figured out how to lower our costs tremendously by sharing the burden of doing what we do with those passionate and able to basically provide computer resources, bandwidth, hard drive space in order to make all this happen. We use a ton of automation. So everything we do, we automate as hard as we possibly can. And anytime a human has to do something, we figure out why the automation couldn't do it. We pay the human, make the human happy, and then we make the automation do it. And this means that for all the kinds of things that you would run into, moderation, content acquisition, downloading, you start to be able to do that with a lot less money than you otherwise would have to. Lately, we've also started looking into very, very clever technology to start to reduce our costs. And at the moment, our costs, frankly, are $140 for a cloud server that we need, and another $100 for a cloud server that we don't, that we're getting rid of. Other than that, that is basically our costs, and we spend maybe $200 to $300 a month on development and our upload crew, who are very cool and who we love. Now, that hasn't always been the case. We've spent a lot of money. I probably have spent 50 grand and pretty much run out of money a few times. It has been bad. And finally, the other way that we're free, sorry for that diversion, is we basically take the best piracy technology out there and we use it for good. So without casting any judgment on what piracy is or does, a lot of the best technologies in the world have actually come about because people wanted to share a TV show for free. And so we sort of take that, turn it on its head, and we use it to distribute our content, which is legally free, and where the artists have explicitly consented for their works to be shared with the world, and we're just helping them do it. So why are we free? Well, pretty simply, free culture is built on sharing. The entire thing that Riff is, does, and ever has been is that we share what's already out there, is already free, and we just try to make it better and more accessible with faster speeds and just a better experience. So trying to build a paid platform on the top of that, trying to run ads, trying to really appreciably profit off that would make a lot of sense in the short to medium term, but it would make the entire thing a little bit pointless. It would ring really hollow, and none of the people that are really involved in free culture would actually be okay with that. Can you guys still hear me all right?
Okay.
Cool. So, you know, it would make it pointless, and we need those people on our side because otherwise this just can never work. And the other thing is that right now, today, you can download pretty much any television show in the world for free with enough determination, any piece of music. There's limitations, but that is a reality, and that's a reality today. People take the world's culture and they share it with each other, and sometimes they even remix it. And they do this with or without permission. You have sites like the Pirate Bay. You have many, many sites out there that are explicitly a lot less interested in the legality of what they do. And the reason I bring this up is simply that they handle hundreds of terabytes of bandwidth, often per day. They have very high server costs. And if you think about the costs of what they're doing, it becomes really amazing to think that almost every piracy site out there does it for free, other than just user donations, and all the users do it for free. And of course, that's a bit of a different thing, but it's, why can't we do it for legally free content if it's already being done for everything, right? If Game of Thrones is something that you can just kind of get out there, or whatever your particular poison is, why is there not room and technology to do it for the average person who just wants to make a record, share it with the world, and maybe have someone cool hear it? And then I guess the final reason we're free for now is, well, the final reason for now, we will always be free. It turns out that doing it the hard way is actually cheaper long term. So because we don't really have a very solid revenue stream, although we do have some fairly good plans now in the works to do that without sacrificing anything, we've basically been forced to cut costs and to innovate really, really hard. Sometimes that innovation comes in the form of me not sleeping for days and downing too much Red Bull and then making all my friends very worried when I turn into a horrible, horrible mess. That's happening less and less, that I'm hoping will hopefully never happen again. But throughout those, desperate days of being low on money and finding what we're doing really hard, some of the best technologies we've ever built and open sourced came out of that. So it's actually a good thing for us that we didn't have money, because if we had, $1 million a year, then we'd hit the scaling wall, which I'll talk about later, and we'd run out of money anyway, and we wouldn't have a solution. So sometimes being poor is actually cheaper. And finally, we want to preserve and free the world's culture. We want to be archivists. We want to make sure that if someone makes a piece of music and shares it with the world, and anyone finds it good, that work is preserved and made available as best as possible. And that's something that we're really, really passionate about. Freeing the world's culture in real concrete terms simply has to do with the fact that pretty much everyone in society listens to music and movies, watches TV shows, whatever they're doing. They interact with culture that they have no control over. They interact with things that other people made that they're not allowed to touch, that they're not allowed to share with their friends. And we believe in the right for an artist to self-determine who can do what with their work. We're not actually in it for just complete do what you want anarchy. But at the same time, it would be nice if more of the world's culture was free and that people could interact with it. And people could basically decide that, they want to remix this. They want to share their version of this song. They want to share this with their friends. So that's what we do. And that's what we mean when we say free the world's culture. We want to make more of culture, shareable. And how we do that is we just take what's already being shared in that way, and we make it easier to get it. So I'll go over the history of Riff.CC. I'll try to be brief. It is a long story. Way back in 2009, I downloaded an album called Let's Kick Fire by a gentleman named Adam McAfee. And Let's Kick Fire is a folk album, which is interesting because I never actually liked folk. And I guess I kind of like it now after 10 years of being exposed to it. But there was a website you could go to called FrostClick, which is actually still around today, where everything on the blog was legally free. It was Creative Commons. It was the artist decided that they wanted to share what they'd done with the world, and they wanted the world to hear it and see it, and they didn't really care if they got paid. And I found this really fascinating. I had been listening to Nine Inch Nails, some of their albums, because they were dabbling with Creative Commons at the time, and I just was really into it. I thought it was really cool. But I downloaded this album, and I started to realize that a few things were immediately wrong. The quality was not great. It was MP3 128K, which, if for any of you familiar with it, is not a particularly awesome format. And if I recall correctly, the file names were weird. It wasn't great. And I was like, well, this is puzzling to me because, I've dabbled in the other sites that are a little bit less legal. And I know that their curation is second to none. You have basically the world's most detailed music library, not necessarily the most complete, but the world's most detailed music libraries are actually illegal. And in most countries. And I just think, well, you know, why is that? Why is that the case? And so I was like, all right, well, I need this in higher quality. So I contacted that artist and said, hey, you know, can you please send me this album, but in a, you know, ideally lossless? Can you give this to me in higher quality? And he wrote back and said, I don't actually know how to do that. And I think I wrote back and said, that's disappointing. And a few minutes later, he actually emails me and says, what's your address? And it turned out that he asked for my address, and being a 17-year-old kid, I asked my parents if I could give him my address. They said yes. I don't know why, but thank you. And he actually mailed me 2 physical pressed copies of his album, complete cover art, like manufactured CDs, just for free, no questions asked, just here you go. Here it is in higher quality. And I'd already told him, I want to share this with the world. I want to rip this and put this on some sites I'm on, and he pretty much was like, oh, okay, that's a thing. So I took the album and I put it on a site called MiniNova, and it got a little bit of attention. It got a few hundred downloads, and I just thought, wow, this is so cool. A few hundred downloads. This is cool. Yeah. And so, you know, I realized that MiniNova had a content distribution program where you could upload whatever you wanted as long as it was legally free, and whatever you uploaded would hit the front page of the most trafficked piracy site on the internet. In fact, I think it was like number 180 in the world on the internet. It was hugely popular. They had millions and millions of people visiting every single day. I think it peaked hundreds of millions. It was fecking huge. So they had a content distribution program. You just applied to it, and you're like, yep, I would like to distribute content. So I did that. They accepted me a few hours later. And I just noticed every time I published something, it hit the very front page at the very, very top and was just featured for the world, and millions of people in some way were exposed to it. And I just thought, okay, that is pretty cool. So, you know, I uploaded 135 things, and for the most part, that's just, you know, business as usual. That just brought it along, and I got, you know, a few thousand downloads for most things I uploaded, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever because I was a 17-year-old kid, and just the fact that anyone could actually do this, I thought was incredible. But then the problem began when I started to realize that phrase, anyone can do this. And I started to realize that wasn't true, because I had to apply for special permission to MiniNova to be able to upload content at all. Not even necessarily to upload content and get it approved, which is technically how Riff works, but if you don't like it, you can always fork us. But I had a problem with that. And I was beginning to start looking at Spotify and a few other services that had been popping up over the years, and I was talking to musicians, and I just got the impression and the understanding after a while that pretty much everything out there charged you money to give your own music away for free. And the situation hasn't really gotten too much better today. You can give your music away for free now, but it's usually got ads attached, and it's just ugly. So I was like, okay, I'm angry about this. This needs to change. Even though MiniNova is great, I'm like, they are running this in an extremely costly way because they have to pay for all the servers, they have to pay for all the seed boxes, and it's just, yeah, bleh. So, as a user of a small little music piracy site called WhatCD at the time, I knew how much better it was over there. You could look up an artist or an album, and not only would you find it in perfect quality with some of the fastest download speeds you've ever heard of, you would find that it had the perfect file names, perfect everything that a musician or a music aficionado could want. It was very well curated, very well looked after. And that was the other thing that was lacking. The few free services that actually allowed you to do stuff like, you know, Jamendo and things like that, they would mangle the file names, they would deliver it probably in low quality, they'd screw up the tags, they wouldn't actually follow the intent of the artist. And so that was annoying. And it's like, well, so these guys are doing it for free, illegally, with absolutely no money changing hands, no ads, no nothing. Okay, that's annoying. Oh wait, what.cd is open source. Okay, cool. Let's spin up our own what.cd and we'll do it legally, because I know there's legal stuff out there. It can't be that hard. It was hard, as it turns out. Especially given I didn't have any idea what the hell I was doing, and I'd never even heard of CentOS, which was the only thing that what.cd software supported. So I managed to, convince it to work. And then I thought, okay, well, this is cool. I can upload music, I can download music, and actually the experience was pretty much better than most things that existed back then. And sadly, it's better than a lot of the things that exist today if you ignore, streaming, which is a big thing to ignore. But I was like, all right, this is cool. As long as I put content on here with good tagging and good file names and good quality, then cool, we're there. And then I realized we weren't there. I realized that you needed a social aspect, you needed ways for people to discover content, not just to find it when they knew about it. And so I had the brilliant idea at the time that, oh, there's this thing called Reddit. Reddit is open source. Surely we can just take Reddit and take the what.cd codebase and mash them together, and out will come a beautiful, perfect, happy baby that solves all the world's problems and is totally great. And of course, that's how I saw it, and that's what I thought, until I then realized that PHP and Python are not the same thing and don't really play all that well together, although if you know what you're doing, you can make it happen. And having never really done programming before, I was like, crap. So then we entered the first hibernation, the first great hibernation, and essentially from 2011 through to late 2020, in fact, I guess this is, we pretty much didn't really do much other than just a ton of research, a ton of experimentation, and just really, really trying to figure things out. And I say we because I'm finally used to having a team, but up until December 2020, it was me. It was me alone. And I'm very, very grateful it's not anymore. But in that time, something really monumental happened, which is that MiniNova got sued badly because everything they were doing was basically illegal except for the content distribution program, which they only really had to help sort of justify what they were doing. And actually, that's not really fair because those guys are really awesome and they had other intentions too, but that's how the world saw it, right? And so MiniNova got pretty much shut down, and they tried a few things, and it's a whole long story. But the end result was they actually had to remove everything from the site that wasn't in the content distribution program, because that's the only stuff they could be really confident they had the rights to distribute. And so where that left us is that Riff, or RiffCC as it existed back then, which was me, was pretty much one of the only things left on MiniNova. And I think maybe 3 to 10% of all of the MiniNova CD releases were RiffCC. It was us. I should really contact those guys, get some numbers, but yeah. And so interesting things happen when you take one of the most trafficked sites in the world and remove almost everything except for the stuff we uploaded. And also, to be fair, a bunch of stuff that other people uploaded in the same vein. So everything on MiniNova CD that was left was legal, but there wasn't much of it. And so we went from 500 or about 1,000 downloads a day-ish up to 10,000 and then 20,000. And then I think it peaked at about 65,000 downloads per day. It was absolutely insane. And music that I'd sort of helped bring into the world, and writings that I'd helped, talk to the artist and talk to them about what they do and why they're passionate about their work. Movies that people made in 2 weeks. A lot of really interesting stuff was suddenly seen by a whole lot of people. And that original album that Adam McAfee originally shared started to hit the 100,000 downloads mark, and I thought that was so cool. And so this all happened, and then MiniNova ran out of money. Because it turns out when you're ad-based, and most people coming to your site expect to see, the world's culture, but the kind that they're familiar with, you tend to run out of money. It's just an unfortunate thing, especially when you have very, very high server costs, which was illustrative to us, and we remembered it. And so resumed the hibernation, but now I was a little bit pissed, because the only thing that I'd found out there that allowed me to do what I wanted to do with the content that I had disappeared into the void and no longer existed, and nothing out there had replaced it. And I thought, you know what? This needs to exist. There is no alternative. It simply has to. And if no one else does it, I'm just going to make it happen. And I'll try to get help, but this is just the road. So nothing really happened until December 2020, other than just collecting Creative Commons material for the hopeful day when one day the sun would shine again and we would step into the light and things would be better. And I started to realize towards the end of 2020 that I knew how to do storage at scale. I knew how to build big systems around the world that allowed you to distribute stuff for free-ish, except for all the parts where I had to pay for it. And I thought that was cool, and I started just looking for a front end. I started just looking for a media player where you can just feed it a traditional web service full of media files, and it just plays them. And I thought, okay, I'll find that, and obviously that'll solve all our problems magically. It didn't, particularly because I didn't find that thing. And I was very lucky I didn't, because what I found was Unit 3D. Not to be confused with Unity. It's the thing that runs Riff.CC today. And it's basically a private torrent tracker that allows you to build a content platform of any kind. And of course, I chose to build Riff on it. And so we had something now. We had a decent user experience for people that were willing to be sort of power usery or learn it, which was really aimed towards, people who were used to dealing with files and doing music curation, like power users, right? And so we ran with it, and we did what we could. We started to ingest content. We started to figure out our licensing issues and how we would deal with that legal stuff and, all just the sort of cute initial problems. And then we realized after a while just how many problems start to come with that approach. And, we solved a lot of those problems. We figured out that we could go to archive.org and we could ingest hundreds of thousands of releases, which we're still working through. And then we realized that in order to do that, you need to be able to download hundreds of thousands of BitTorrent files and the contents within in reasonable amounts of time. So we had to just invent a way to do that, because unfortunately that's not very well documented, and almost everything that uses BitTorrent, all the BitTorrent clients only really scale to 2,000 to 5,000 torrents at best, and we needed at least 100,000 at a time. So we invented the the silly radio. It's open source, it's on GitHub, it's fun. It's stupid, but it's fun and silly. And so we plodded along. We hired the upload crew. So a bunch of people around the world, primarily India and Venezuela, who pretty much go on archive.org and other websites, library of, the Louvre, the museum. It's all a public domain. You can get that. It's all free culture now. So they find that stuff. They bring it to us. We ingest it. We pick out the best of it, and we try to highlight it. And so that's been how we operated for a while. And then we sort of started to hit a few walls, and we entered our second hibernation. So right now, Riff exists, Riff Alpha, Riff.CC Alpha, sorry. And you can use it. You can download stuff. You can earn bonus points by seeding content and stack them bonds. But, there's a lot that we feel is missing. And in particular, we want streaming. So we worked on that. We got streaming tech. We're like, great, this is cool. And then we started to think about the wall. And the wall is a later slide, but the wall basically comes down to there being a point where you've taken on tens of thousands of users, ideally, and you're starting to think, how do we actually pay for this? And when you're moving that much stuff around, even if all the users are doing all the content distribution, you're going to hit that wall someday where you cannot afford the computers to actually handle it and you run out of money because you're silly and decided that free culture is cool. And so that was sort of where the story was until a few weeks ago, when I drank some Red Bull one fateful night, and I came up with the director, which we'll talk about later. And so, that leaves the future, which we'll talk about in a second, but where it really comes, where we really are now is we're building magical robots, and we're crafting something called the director. So what's actually on Riff? We have movies, we have music, books, games. We have views from the International Space Station, which is not an exaggeration. To be fair, it's one video, but you can actually watch video that was filmed in space pointing at Earth, and you can watch auroras dance across the planet, and you can just kind of get to experience this stuff that you can find on YouTube, but you can't really find in huge quantities in one place with fast download speeds and no ads. We've also started to add scientific data, scientific papers, and educational courses, such as college courses, and just, the sort of things that we feel should be out there for the world and that anyone should have access to, because there's no real reason why people shouldn't get access to some culture. So what actually is really involved in something like this project? We obviously have legal. We have a lot of legal to deal with. Luckily, for the most part, that turns out to be fairly easy so far. We have licensing. We have to make sure everything that we put on the platform is legal for people to share. And sometimes we have to take it down, which means we need moderators. So the upload crew are also moderators, and the founding team are moderators, and we sort of share the burden of trying to keep the platform free of anything that is questionable or abusive, because we explicitly have a rule against anything being abusive, and we haven't really drawn a line on what abusive is yet. And so we also build robots. That's primarily what I do, and what I mean by robots is just automated programs that help manage the whole thing. We obviously find content, so we scrape the whole web for anything legally free, movies, music, games, as I said. And we grab it, we ingest it, which is this whole process, which I'll probably talk about in the technical side. And we put it on the platform, and we try to make it available for the people with good descriptions, source information, so you can find where it came from, you can find out what you're allowed to do with it. Tons of development. There's a lot of stuff being developed, and in particular, we are aiming to do native applications for pretty much every screen that's in your life. We're aiming to be on Xboxes, PlayStations, smartphones, televisions, computers, laptops, and fridges. I'm not kidding. We actually have smart fridges as an actual target, and have contacted companies that are in that space saying, can we please have a development kit? And no, you don't have to send me a fridge. Please just give me remote access to a fridge so I can push code across the internet and see if I can run my weird platform on your fridge. Most have not replied. Yet. We're not cool enough yet, apparently. We obviously do infrastructure work because we've had to. And finally, we invent things. We realize that something just can't be done, or at least hasn't publicly been done or not very well publicized, because obviously we're probably not the first to do most of what we're doing. So we invent it. It's just what we have to do to survive. So I was talking about the scaling wall. And what I meant by that is just that, you hit a point, you can't pay for your platform anymore, because you've chosen to forego all short and medium-term profits in the name of eventually, long-term, becoming so good at what you're doing that people will pay you to teach them how to do what they're doing better, we hope. But realistically, if you have a 10,000 user platform with a lot of people on it, and you're moving a lot of content, you're usually looking at about $10,000 a year, we think. If we scale it up to 100,000 users, you could reach 50,000 a year. If you had 1 million users, you're starting to look at the $250,000 a year mark. And of course, these numbers are probably a little bit fudged because I made them up. But I've also thought about it in the past, and you do start to hit a lot of problems when you start to really scale. You need more computers, you need more bandwidth, you need more disks, you just have to coordinate computers. It just becomes a total pain. So these rough estimates are actually based on how many servers we think we'd need, how much bandwidth, etc. And it just turns out that running websites at scale is not cheap. But in particular, running streaming websites at scale is very much not cheap. And how not cheap? Well, the thing is, these figures mostly ignore the fact that you actually have to move video and audio and all that stuff to users without getting too broke. And, you know, sites like WhatCD, realistically, I think they spent about $10,000 a year for like 50,000 users. And they had a lot of users that were really, really happy to help them not go broke by donating to them and all kinds of other stuff. So even if you're cheap, it really is not cheap. Very much not cheap. So today, we are looking at ingesting and distributing 400 terabytes of content comprising over 1 million pieces of media, everything from books to games to movies, you know, everything I talked about earlier. And this is the cheapest option we know of to do it the traditional way of having a cloud provider who helps you distribute your content to the world. And this is actually before you even put a CDN in front of it to make it not awfully slow. So basically, take this number and double it, and you might come close. This is United States dollars, not even Australian dollars, $72,000 pretty much is the sum of it. And I'll show you where I got those numbers in a second. But really what it boils down to is if we took 400 terabytes of content and we distribute it around the world to people like once, then pretty much this is where you end up. I think maybe I said 10 people actually, but yeah, I'll show you the numbers in a second. There's a calculator. So that is the cheapest way that we know of. That's doing it through Backblaze, who are awesome. We love Backblaze. They're a cool company. But it's very, 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 very not cheap. Because the minute you start doing this on anybody else, according to the Backblaze calculator, it starts to get very, 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 very expensive. Now, to be fair, the Backblaze calculator hasn't really taken into account the fact that you can do things a lot cheaper on S3 than they say you can. But by the time you're layering everything in front of it, realistically, you are looking at $250,000-ish probably to do what they do. And when you then compare that to the other cloud providers, and you start to realize, well, it's just not cheap. So for a very modest amount of users, you very quickly reach what I call the scary dollars, which is where things just start to look very scary, and you start to wonder how the hell we're all going to pay for this. So where are we going? Well, you know, this presentation is unfortunately quite rushed in terms of preparation, so there was meant to be a slide before that. I apologize. But basically, you end up in a place where you're like, we probably can't do this traditionally. We need to figure out how we can do this in a way that's a little bit more innovative, which does lead into this. Where are we going? What have we done to try to cut that down a bit? Well, the first thing we've done is we've taken the idea of, you know, those existing sites that were used for less legitimate purposes, and we looked at some of the more successful ones and what they do. And how they've done it is they've invented bonus points that they didn't necessarily invent, but we certainly did not, where people are rewarded for keeping content alive, keeping it on the platform, and helping other people to get it. There are plenty of bonus point systems out there, and it's not real money. It is play money that's just used to buy perks on the sites, such as avatars and things like that. And so that's sort of where we started. We're like, well, people like these. Obviously, they work. Why don't we use bonus points? And of course, Unit 3D had it all built in. So we're like, that's cool. And then we started to think, well, why couldn't this be a cryptocurrency? Cryptocurrencies solve a lot of problems and add dozens more. But, you know, it would be a really cool thing if people could be rewarded, even in a small way, for helping to share stuff and keep our dream alive. And so we took the idea of bonds and we decided, well, we're going, or bond, sorry, is our current thing. And we decided, yeah, we're gonna turn this into a real currency. So we started looking at Bitcoin Cash and trying to make our own token and all this other stuff. And we pretty much landed on someday we'll switch to Bitcoin Cash and make our own token on there, and it will be great. And I'll get back to you on how that's going. But that was the first thing. It's like, okay, well, we have this idea that, you know, people on the site are seeding, they're being rewarded with these bonus points, and we're pretty confident that one day we can turn those into a cryptocurrency that can be assigned to people, and everything that they've earned up until that point will become a real tradable token. Great, so we've incentivized the users. Well, we still have this massive scaling wall, because even WhatCD and the Pirate Bay and so on spends a lot of money, and the Pirate Bay has to run ads, to be fair. Okay, well, we're still screwed. So what we did is we invented a way to run with no servers, no central servers, because, of course, there is not really a such thing as truly server-free yet. And so you still do have to pay for some things. Obviously, you have to pay for the thing that puts it out there. You probably have to pay to make sure that it stays out there. And you have to pay for anything particularly interactive where people have to like or dislike or comment on things or whatever. But we had the realization that most of the things that people do on a website, most of the things you interact with, are pretty much read-only. When you go to Netflix and you watch a movie, not really anything is having to be written to Netflix, right? And if you think about how much content like this changes, well, it changes a lot as you add stuff. And as the stuff gets, you know, descriptions edited and things fixed about it, and so on. But at a certain point, most content enters a bit of a sleeping period where it doesn't change much, and most of the time, 90% of what you're doing won't change much. And when you start to have millions of things on your site, very little of it will really change. So it's like, well, why do we need servers to generate files that tell everyone how to get at something that doesn't change very much? Why can't we skip the middleman and just generate those files directly and regenerate them as needed? And before anyone says it, I'm aware that that is what caching proxies and so on are for. But at a certain point, you then start to have dozens and dozens of machines that are doing proxying, and you still end up with a massive problem, and it's a headache. So we're like, okay, that's annoying. And in a very, very sleep-deprived state, I started looking at, you know, Ethereum and Bitcoin and how to do this the magic, decentralized, clever way and solve all your problems and never have to pay for servers again and be truly free. And then I realized that to do that on Ethereum would cost me $350,000 a year for 10,000 users, which sucks and is even worse. So, okay, we can't do that. Let's look at everyone else. So let's look at Arweave. Let's look at Solana. Let's look at Bitcoin Cash. How do we do what we need to do without going broke? And it turned out that all of them are great at what they do, but kind of sucked at what we want to do. So they weren't really great. And if anyone knows a better way to do this, well, talk to me 2 months ago and save me from the pain. But what we figured out is that we could actually just take everything that defines Riff, put it in a database, which it already was in, or, you know, potentially transform it into a different database for no reason, and then take what Riff is and turn it into files directly and compile the files or transpile the files and just make this something that you do ahead of time rather than every time someone needs it for 10,000 or 100,000 or 1,000,000 users. And I'm sorry that got technical. I promised I wouldn't. But pretty much just imagine that every single time you go to your supermarket and you say, "Can I please have an orange?" They say, "Let me figure out what an orange is," and then hand you an orange. I'll be a few milliseconds, maybe a few seconds, and if things get bad enough, maybe I won't be able to do it at all because I ran out of money or our servers are down. Right? So that starts to become ridiculous. And then when it starts to mean that your orange costs $50 instead of a few dollars or a few cents or whatever oranges cost, it's just not great. So where we ended up, we wrote this thing. We dealt with a bunch of problems because trying to do that is insane and horrible, and that's why no one really does it yet. And we ended up with the director, which is something that we think does it quite well. So we now have a pretty plausible way of running server free. We still have to pay for a few servers, and obviously then also have to pay for disks. But the difference is we're genuinely moving towards something where most of the computers that comprise Riff will be in my home and at my friends' places, and ideally at an office when someone gives us money. We genuinely are moving there. So that's cool, but here's the shiny thing. This is what we're building. This is the streaming interface. This is what Riff is going to look like, where rather than it being stuff you can download, you can just go here, you can listen to music, you can watch films, you can download games if your platform supports it. Obviously, if you're doing this on a smart television, then you probably won't be able to download games. But there's lots of possibilities, and it turns out that with what we were already moving towards with IPFS, which we'll talk about in the technical side, building something like this actually became somewhat easy. It still sucks because you have to develop it, but because you're just basically doing what normal websites do for the most part, you can actually be quite reasonable about it. And so this is what we've been building for a while, and we'll get there someday. This is a concept design. I can't really click anything or else I'd be showing off right now. We all know it. So that leads into the future. So what are we going to do in the next few months and years? Well, obviously, we want to build that experience. We want to be a real streaming service where you can just go, you can enjoy content, and you can share it with your friends, and you can do all the great stuff that we've been trying to do for 10 damn years. Other than that, we're going to ingest between 400 terabytes and a petabyte of content, which is 100,000 high-definition movies of stuff until you double it and look towards a petabyte, and it starts to hit the scary numbers. It comprises 1 million pieces of content, and that's what we're getting started with. We're gearing up to be able to ingest 400 terabytes every 5 to 6 weeks. We're moving towards a server-free architecture, and one of the cooler things, which I'm actually sharing publicly for the very first time, which is relieving, we actually have a real native experience now, which is based on an app called Kodi. And Kodi is cool because it's a media player that lets you play music, TV shows, movies, etc. And Kodi is on pretty much everything. You can get it on your Android phone, Android television, you can get it on your computer, and interestingly enough, you can get it on your Xbox. But the cooler thing is coming in a second. So Kodi turned out to be remarkably easy, but we're not quite ready to actually share it and show it off, too strongly and just put it out there for the world. But that's where we're going. We have a working Kodi app. It's just taking some polish and some fallback and so on. But once we publish that, you'll be able to actually stream anything that we've published with streaming tags attached and start to really use the platform like it was intended. And that's sort of the shortcut which we're taking to just be able to provide something that's really useful and that your mom can probably maybe use. And then once we're a little bit more confident with that and we've done enough automation to make the entire platform streamable, we will be launching our streaming apps. And those will be on pretty much everything. So tablets, PCs, laptops, TVs, Xboxes, PlayStations, ideally iPhones, and, as I said, smart fridges. So that's coming. The bottom line is, with all the things that have changed, Riff.CC can be run without any money at all. Technically. Asterisk. It's complicated. So it's almost time for questions, but I'll just quickly answer the elephant in the room, which is how do you ensure everything on the site is legal? And the answer is blah, blah, blah technical. But for the most part, it means that everything that anyone uploads to the site doesn't appear on the site until the moderation team approves it, which is annoying. But, that keeps some stuff off. That's good enough. Oh, wait, except for when you start to have too much stuff and there's not enough moderators because you don't have any money because you're silly. So we deal with that by just making sure that everything that ever gets uploaded to the site has a source for where it came from. And we're somewhat loose with enforcing that right now because we're most of the people that actually upload stuff. But in the future, that will be the case. So the only catch with Riff will basically be anything you upload, you have to tell us where it came from, which means that we'll be able to go there and find out what you're legally allowed to do with it, and perhaps more importantly, what other people are allowed to do with it. And the nice thing is we can do that without humans for the most part. We can do that with automation. And what we do is just every time we run into something that the humans can't do, we make the automation better and figure out why the humans couldn't do it. We pay the human and we move on. So that's pretty much the talk for now. Hopefully I did keep that general interest. We'll move on to questions momentarily, but to sum it all up, we're sticking around. We have been doing this a long time, and we want to stick around for the next 600 years, is our unofficial internal target. And in order to do that, we have to solve some really hard problems and be able to run cheaply. So if you want to get involved, you can join us at Riff.CC. That's our actual address. If you want to, you can type https://riff.cc, but if you just type riff.cc into any phone, tablet, web browser, whatever, you'll pretty much hit our website. If you hit the sign up link in the top right, you'll be able to create an account. If you're interested, you'll be able to start farming our currency, which is called Bon, and will soon be called Bonds because someone else's currency is called Bon, and it's confusing, and we don't want to be sued. But it's neat because you can earn this currency that currently isn't worth anything and someday might be, but it is fun. And some people have actually bought it. We've had real-world transactions of people buying and selling bonds and speculating. And the future of it is we're going to put it on exchanges. We're going to try to make it as real of a cryptocurrency as possible. The economic details we'll probably talk about in the technical side. So we're here. We're sticking around. And we don't really have any reason to ever deal with charging our users any money or running ads or just doing any of the stuff that we don't personally like. And that's not a judgment against any of the platforms that have to do that. Money's good. I like money, but it's just not what we do. So with that, I'm going to pass it to questions. And before I go too far into it, sorry. You guys are welcome to shuffle out and leave during the technical session if you don't want to get technical, because I will lose probably most people, maybe. And we won't be offended. I won't be offended if you do that. But with that, let's turn it over to questions. And thank you all very much for listening and for giving me your time tonight. I really appreciate it. So I will turn off the screen sharing. And is there any way I can see the audience, or is it pretty much just what we have?
So I just tried disconnecting.
Okay. I guess we can just do audio only. I don't know if there are anyone with burning questions, but we'll see. Oh, yes. I probably should just put the link in chat for people to have. Technically, if you just do Riff.CC, that will also work. I don't know if you guys can hear me at the moment, so I'll just kind of quietly sit here and, think to myself, it has been a very long day. Yeah. So I got sick with a cold, and I started to realize throughout the course of today that not only would I not be able to attend in person, I also realized I had very precious little time to finish my preparations and ideally deliver something entertaining. So I'm really hoping that was how this came across, and if so, awesome. Hello?
Can you hear me?
I can. Could you hear me that whole time, or was I talking to myself?
We can hear you. It's Lawrence here. On the EFS,
Yes.
they actually use file calling that represents endpoint bandwidth and storage. So if
Yeah.
you thought about saying that, oh, people who see it effectively get Filecoins, which represent,
Yeah, so
end user interest.
yeah. So yeah, it's a good point, but Filecoin and IPFS are actually not directly tied. Filecoin uses IPFS to make itself work. The IPFS network, which is the Interplanetary File System, for those familiar with BitTorrent, it's basically the successor to BitTorrent. It's carried on a lot of its technology and merged in some really cool stuff. Is a global network where people can make stuff available to the world on a peer-to-peer network that is inherently global, which means that it actually doesn't depend on any particular person other than the people that are making the stuff available. So we don't interact with any blockchain at all. When we are seeding the content to the world ourselves, and then for now at least, people that are earning bonds actually also don't interact with blockchain yet. And there is this sort of awkward thing, which is that we are using BitTorrent for now on our thing, but we'll soon be transitioning fully to IPFS, where everyone in the entire ecosystem of Riff will be using IPFS. For now, IPFS is just streaming for us, but we're going there. So it's a global network that you can use with no permission from anyone, and you can distribute stuff and do all the things that we need to do without having to deal with crypto stuff and moon juice and all that good stuff. So Filecoin is cool, and it's interesting, and it does some cool stuff, but it also has a really high barrier to entry, and we just basically haven't needed to deal with it yet. So we don't interact with Filecoin at all with what we do.
My name's Michael Collins. This is my first time hearing about Riff, and it sounds like a really amazing platform. I was just wondering, cryptocurrencies have like such a reputation of being bad for the environment. Where do you get off making another cryptocurrency?
Yeah, we have deliberately not gone down the route of making our own cryptocurrency because trying to do your own cryptocurrency is a nightmare, and we already have big problems, and we don't necessarily want to do that. But what we do behind the scenes is we do research projects internally, and we work to take the best blockchain projects out there and help them be a lot better. So, you know, a lot of it we can't really share yet, unfortunately, because it's not ready. But as soon as we share it, it will be open source. It will follow all the same principles we have. And we hope that the things we're doing to improve public blockchains like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, Bitcoin Cash, whatever, will actually be implemented by every crypto that is in any way reputable. So I think I overheard stuff about Ripple. I'd love to be there to talk about Ripple and why I'm not a huge fan, but it is a really cool project, and my opinions are weird and potentially irrelevant on that. So yeah, we'll probably be sharing stuff about that really, really soon, but for now it's something internal. But we're hoping that, sorry.
Question. If I was to farm one of these bonds versus one Bitcoin, like how many polar bears would die for each of those? Would it be equal, or would it be?
So Bitcoin Cash, which is what we're building on for now, is significantly greener than Bitcoin, but it achieves that greenness by basically trading off potentially for a bit more centralization and scaling by, you know, doing some stuff that's technical that I promised would be in the second half, not the first. And essentially it means that right now today, Bitcoin Cash is probably the more scalable solution, and it kills less polar bears, which is very good and something we love. But it also doesn't seem like something that will be totally viable 3 to 10 years from now for the entire world to use. So one of the things we're focused on is making world money scalable and making it so that it is essentially worth the environmental impact to do something like what Bitcoin is doing today, because the entire world is able to use the cryptocurrency with roughly the same energy usage that we have today, without just completely crippling the security and decentralization and ruining the entire point. So yeah, I would love to talk about that more, but that's for another time.
If I'm farming bonds, I'm supporting a green cryptocurrency.
You're supporting Bitcoin Cash, which is greener, But we're hoping that some of the stuff we're working on will make pretty much every cryptocurrency green, and that whole argument will start to disappear. So fingers crossed that we actually pull that off and that it isn't just moon juice that we're drinking ourselves. But we're hoping that the environmental impact of, you know, burning as much power as New Zealand will start to look better when, you know, hundreds of thousands or millions or billions of people can transact hundreds or thousands of times a day every day, and we don't have to actually burn more power than an entire massive country. So yeah, that's one of the things we're doing, and I hope that that will actually solve the problem, or at least contribute in some small way to getting there. And with or without us, it's going to happen. Crypto is going to get green. Stuff like Solana is already pretty good, but obviously everything's a trade-off, right? So decentralization is really important. If you want to do world money, you want to do crypto, then you have to do centralization trade-offs. And our hack is we've looked at ways to make that trade-off a lot less expensive in either direction. So you end up with something that's quite secure, but can still be decentralized and still be quite green. So anyway, next question.
Yeah, Wings Not here.
Hi.
Great talk. I remember watching Riff Remix Manifesto with you, and I think this was pre-screening for RiffCC. It's a documentary that holds a lot of the ethos you have for Riff.CC. But how big is the catalog right now within Riff.CC? You mentioned 400 terabytes. Is that around where it's sitting at the moment, or is it a projected figure?
Yeah, so we have we have automation that was able to ingest all of the torrents themselves, but up until recently, I hadn't bitten the bullet and really started to learn to program. And you might have noticed in the talk I said that I'm a programmer. I pretty much, it's been like a week since I've admitted that I guess I can call myself that now. So we had to write Python scripts that would use Python modules that, to be fair, are pretty good, to add up how much content actually is represented by those torrent files. And we got halfway, and we found that it was like 230 terabytes at the halfway mark. And that was not even counting some of the other stuff that we're ingesting. So our conservative estimate right now, when you add it all up, is that it should be around 400 to 450 terabytes of content right now. And that material represents 2 weeks of the upload crew working with sort of the new ingest model of finding content. Because for a while they were doing it very manually. For a while they were handling all the uploads. There's very little automation, which of course we had to solve because we didn't have money to pay them to just hammer through it, which is why it's cheaper to be poor. So yeah, we're hoping that we're going to start reaching the point where we're ingesting about 300 terabyte a month, which was really fun, because when you start talking about basically downloading 100,000 high-definition movies every month, go talk to an internet company and go, oh yeah, I'd like a fast internet connection. They're like, yeah, okay, that sounds great. You're like, I would like to not have any bandwidth caps. They're like, oh, well, we've got very generous bandwidth caps. You can download 5 terabyte and it's fine. You're like, okay, I need to download 100 every month. They're like, oh, what? 100 what? 100 terabytes. What? Why? Well, reasons. And then you talk to them about it, and they're like, oh, that's cool. This is a business line, right? Like, you're paying business prices? Okay, cool. Well, I'll talk to my supervisor, and maybe we'll make this happen, possibly. So yeah, it turns out that doing that is very expensive, and we're gearing up to hopefully do that soon. But it turns out that some of the fastest internet is in Mandarin. That's the whole thing in WA. But yeah, so I have a petabyte of disk, which is partially mine in a few senses. It's the foundation. So we have the hardware right now to do ingest for a few months and then run out of disk and start to be sad. So for now, we're probably going to go with just putting hard drives at people's houses and ingesting 200 terabyte a month, just this tiny amount of content, and doing that the cheap way. But when we start to really gear up and we find someone to give us a lot of hard drives and start to scale and get money and run Patreon and all that stuff, we're hoping we'll just do a ton of ingest, and the upload crew, when they're at full capacity, should bring us to the point where we're pulling in 1 to 3 petabytes of content a year. And I'd estimate that within 5 years, we will have ingested almost all of the best content on the entire internet that is legally free. And then we'll start to look at the stuff that might be less popular and more niche, like really, really angry metal screamo music. And we'll also start to look at the stuff that's just harder to find or less easy to automate, and we'll start bringing it in because we think there's about 100 to 500 petabytes of legally free content out there. If you ask the Creative Commons Foundation, who we like talking to because they're lovely people, you're actually talking about like 2.6 billion pieces of content is last time I checked a few weeks ago. It's a lot. It's enough that what we've already started to ingest is actually more video than there is on Netflix worldwide. The obvious catch is that most of what's on Netflix has been carefully selected by humans who get paid to do what they do, and we can't really make a direct comparison, but that's the sort of stuff we're talking about. So yeah, it's real world 400 terabytes.
Hi, it's James here. Why don't you call the site Riff?
Well, it's something that's a little bit lost to history, so I actually have to speculate a little bit. The CC came from Creative Commons because obviously that was something that we were dabbling with very, very early on and pretty much, I guess, literally before it began. And Riff was probably because I was learning to play guitar at the time and I still needed to learn. But luckily there's a lot of free ways to learn guitar these days and a lot of them are Creative Commons. So I think it was the idea that someone could take something small and share it with the world if they made it big enough, or they could work with other people to make things. And one of the things that did actually inspire this was I joined a group called the Intercontinental Music Lab, who builds music by sending music around the world, and people record it in their homes or their studios or whatever they can afford, and they build an album together. And they've done this, I think, 8 times, and that was one of the things we distributed on Riff. And if you really hate me and want me to be sad, technically there is an Intercontinental Music Lab album which has my singing on it, and it's horrible, and please don't look into it too much. But I think I was inspired by a lot of things coming together, and that was the really early days. I don't exactly know what the hit timeline of that was, but it was just the idea that you take something small, work with others, and build something better and bigger. And I found later on, which is on our marketing site, sorry if anyone's asking questions, Wikipedia, if you look up Riff, pardon?
I think we've got all the questions, so...
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'll move on. I'll talk about that later. Yeah.
No, I said I think everyone's asking questions.
Oh, sorry, everyone's asked their questions. So Wikipedia defines Riff as a pattern or melody that forms the basis or accompaniment of a musical composition, which is sort of a really complicated way to say that, you know, whatever it he said, we would like to do that. We'd like to distribute little bits that can be made into bigger, better bits. There's a question from the audience tuning in today saying, you mentioned all the code is free software. Do you plan to make the JavaScript code Libre.js compliant as well? So the short answer is absolutely, hell yes. It probably to an extent already is, because everything that is on the site is AGPL v3 already. That's our current platform. So you can see our code at github.com/riff.cc. Sorry, there is no dot. And yeah, everything we run is already published. You can read the JavaScript, you can do stuff. It's not quite good enough yet because we want people to be able to replace it with their own, you know, more Libre code. But essentially, we're going to work towards that. I think we're already pretty close. But the thing that like the average person is going to interact with later on is going to be that streaming app, that like thing I showed off earlier. And you know, that's what you'll see. It'll be a JavaScript based streaming client that is all our code for the most part. Well, pretty much entirely. other than Stack Overflow stuff that's MIT licensed. So we can pretty much do what we need to do with that to make that as properly Libre as we can, and as much as we need to, and as much as our users demand. So the answer is yes, absolutely. Maybe today. I haven't looked into it enough to actually determine if we're compliant yet, but we absolutely will be, and it is our intention to be compliant because everything we do is open as hell. So hopefully that answers that. Sorry for being a bit long-winded. The final thing I do want to show off that's really cool, because obviously I have everyone's attention, hopefully. If anyone left, then I'm sorry for boring you, and I'm not offended at all. But let's see if this works, because, oh, that is not... hang on, I'll stop screen sharing for 1 second. I have a video, it's prepared, and we'll see if I can just play it, and if we're going to the moon today. But it is a demo of the Kodi app working today with the serverless architecture in play. There is no smoke and mirrors. It is actually compiled from the Riff.CC database and turned into things, blah, 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 that a web browser can just read and can do stuff with. And because a web browser can read it and it's that basic, it means that Kodi apps or add-ons can also do it. So we have in my downloads folder, I think, actually. Sorry. PXL. Stalling for time while I find the damn video. Okay, I have found the damn video, and we're hopefully ready to go. And you might notice, as I'm sharing this, interestingly enough, I have the WebOS TV development kit installed, which I admittedly haven't touched much yet, but I wasn't kidding about every platform. We are looking at everything we can do. And while I figure out how to make the audio okay, Nick, could you please go ahead and mute the audience audio just for this demo? I'll talk over it a little bit, but here is this very, very rough demo, which is being publicly shown for the first time, and hopefully the audio comes across, because otherwise this will be super awkward. Are we muted? Can you please say in chat if we are, or I'll probably just proceed. It's probably fine. I just don't want to get feedback, because I'm going to unplug my mic, or my headset. So I want to do that because I don't have a great way of sharing the actual video other than literally playing it on the screen and just hoping the audio comes across. So I apologize for it being jank as hell. It's just a consequence of having very little time left to finish polishing. But this is something that I hope you'll appreciate, because the twist is really, really fun.
What is Wings doing?
So this is just like
neat. Okay.
Looking around. I got
we want like video add-ons, right?
I got perplexed because the add-on I was looking for just wasn't, add-on type wasn't there, and whatever.
That wasn't. Okay, well.
So this is loading over the internet from a CDN, the Riff platform, or a small portion of it, a small selection of movies,
Hopefully
and then playing
this
it.
Just works.
Yeah, it sort of did, but so it's kind of cool. You're like, oh, okay, this is Kodi, and this is playing, and there's no actual servers involved other than basically my home computer that's helping to put this out to the world, and a CDN that's helping make it faster to load and so on. I was like, all right, well, let's skip to the middle of the movie and see if it works, and then it crashed because you're not actually able to officially run Kodi on what we're running Kodi on. And some of you might already know what's going on. Please don't ruin it for anyone else if you've already figured it out, but it should become very obvious
Weird going on with seeking at the moment.
in a few seconds.
I feel like there's something wrong
I'm
with the
hoping
CDN.
that this works.
I'm only seeing it on this machine though.
I did figure out what the issue with the CDN was. It wasn't the CDN, it was just there weren't enough well-connected IPFS nodes yet for the CDN to reliably be able to fetch stuff, which is something that is annoying, but will be solved, ironically, by having more users, not less.
And with a little bit of shell script magic, you can get those journal articles. On September 24th,
And here we start to really realize something's a bit weird, because that television is floating and that television is curved and there's nothing holding up that television. Oh my god, what's going on?
as Ghost Laptop. He doesn't hack JSTOR the traditional sense of hacking.
And then the penny drops, and you probably have started to realize that this is in fact a VR headset, and Riff does in fact work in VR on the Oculus Quest 2, which is something that we weren't really aiming to do, but we think is really cool, and we're sort of publicly showing off for the first time. So we have some Oculus gear, and hopefully a developer kit soon as well, although you can just develop with normal consumer gear. We are building a sort of more native VR experience that doesn't crash, because in order to make that work, we had to sideload Kodi, and then basically the add-on pretty much worked, except for a few things that didn't, because everything in Riff is intentional except for all the things that aren't. And of course, trying to get logs off a VR headset to try to figure out why something is crashing is a bit of a nightmare when you haven't really done VR development. So we're showing that off for the first time, and I hope you enjoyed that little demo, and hopefully it was a little bit of a twist. So I just thought that'd be a fun way to end sort of the general audience version of our talk. So that app will soon have audiobooks, music, and a bunch of other stuff in it. And as soon as we have polished it up and there's enough content in there for it to be interesting, we'll be releasing that to the world. It will be open source. It will be MIT licensed for the sections that we wrote ourselves. But realistically, that means that most of it will be GPL, and right now all of it, because it is based on a GPL video add-on. And we would like to be compliant with the people that have helped us to do what we do. So it will mean that you can take the add-on, you can take it apart, change it, use it. We won't sue you if you try to break our platform, because if you try to break our platform, then, well, we did something wrong, because the whole point is that it's server-free and that you can't really tamper with it very easily. So when that Kodi app launches, it actually, whoa. Oh, hello? Sorry, I lost you guys for a second, but I'm back. When that Kodi app launches, it actually fetches a single file from our current traditional web server called Magic Locator. And within that file is a very, very small bit of text that tells the web browser how to load the rest of the platform. And the text is, in fact, just an IPFS hash. And so that means that any method you can use to retrieve content and data from IPFS can be used to load the rest of the platform. And luckily, CDNs and blah, 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 you can load it in a traditional web browser that has no plugins, add-ons, no nothing. And it's not technically real IPFS yet, but someday, very soon, hopefully, you can just load it. And so for the average user, they don't know that anything's decentralized. And because you're using a CDN, well, it costs money, but it's pretty cheap compared to doing all the other crap that you normally need to do to run a service of this kind. And we can afford it for probably the next 5 years at least. And then we have ideas for reducing that further and just having essentially infinite runway once we get a bit more established. So we have ways of solving that. So what that ends up doing for you is that if you're just a regular user, you load the Riff app, and it just works, and you sort of see the platform and you start streaming content, and you're not actually aware of any of the technical stuff going on behind the scenes, even though IPFS is cool. And it actually knows how to find, here's what defines the site, and here's how to find the other stuff that defines the site. And so you end up in this very, very interesting technical recursion crap that I'll probably talk about on the technical side. But it does mean that we can do that without having to have someone install like custom JavaScript Electron app that does weird things and WebTorrent and all that stuff that you could do in browser, but for some reason they often choose not to do. So yeah, it's cool, it's fun. That's where we're going. Everything that we do in the future will be based on that idea. But the natural consequence of that is actually that we start to stop being the center of what we're doing, because of the global nature of IPFS, anything that gets shared on Riff will, once we complete our transition, be shareable anywhere else. And if Riff just were to go down one day completely, then you could actually take our entire platform, all our code, all our apps, all our everything, and just make your own and fork us. But when I say we're open AF, I mean that we're so open that our entire database of content and all the stuff that's not user data, we're very careful about it, is in fact open source. You can find it on GitHub, hopefully, if I made sure to make that repo public, which I should do after this talk. But we regularly publish snapshots of what's on the site, and so you can take it and clone it, and then the director, because it's open source, can be used to make your own Riff and essentially carry on the dream without us. Because not only can you clean the whole platform, but anything that our users are seeding is actually being seeded to the whole world. Anyone on IPFS can retrieve it without even having to ask us, log into our site, nothing. All they need to know is how to find the hashes for their content, and if they hit the magic locator, they can load all in Riff to do that, and if they're crazy, they can probably do it with programming to sort of do that as well. But ultimately, we want to make it so that you can spend like half an hour if you're good at what you're doing, or half a day if you've never really done it before, and just clone Riff and allow it to continue even if the absolute worst should happen to us. And that tech is really cool and fun, and we could have sold it and made lots of money, but we chose to basically forgo money for the short to medium term because we think that long term it means that we are going to become experts in licensing, curation, content, and in particular running a platform of scale like this without having to spend huge amounts of money, which we know that a lot of the centralized platforms struggle with. But while also trading off, hey, let's spend a bit of money so that when you load a movie, it loads pretty much instantly, rather than taking, for example, 8 seconds to load while your girlfriend looks at you and says, okay, so why is decentralized media so cool when this movie is taking forever to load, and the minute I want to skip to the middle of it, it's also frustrating, and then sometimes it just doesn't work at all. So we think that we're going to get really good at that because we have to, just in order to survive and do what we do. And when we get really good at that, and we're good enough to start teaching other people how to do it, that I think is when the money starts to come in, where people actually have us help them to scale. Because while we are a very, very niche idea, the core concepts of the director and the things that it does, which I've hopefully not been too technical about, can actually be applicable to pretty much any web service where most of the stuff you're interacting with is read-only and doesn't need to be fresher than about half an hour old. So all of those things can be made very resilient by putting them through that system and putting them out there. But trying to do it well is very difficult, which is why it's not very common yet, and why we think we've not necessarily invented anything, but taken a few really cool concepts and applied them in a very effective way and chained them together in a way that we haven't actually seen yet. So we're also going to just turn that into something that's just a generic publishing tool where you can publish not only traditional websites, which is pretty easy to do on IPFS, where it's a static website and nothing's really dynamic, to something more complicated like Riff, where while it is still technically not dynamic for the bits that are on IPFS, you don't really notice as a user. So we're hoping that by making those tools available and helping make the web more decentralized and resilient, we can contribute to the good of society. And I didn't manage to go into it, which I'm sad about, but the other thing that we do is we have this system that makes it really, really cheap to distribute content because our users help us do it. And we have a platform that can handle ideally hundreds to millions or billions of users, eventually, asterisk, technically, blah, blah, blah. So what do we do with that if that's really cheap and we have a bunch of hardware that doesn't necessarily do things all the time. Well, we distribute scientific data sets to fight diseases. We distribute scientific papers to help people learn how to fight diseases and solve problems. So we're not really too active in that space yet, but we want to be helping drive the push for innovation in healthcare and disease eradication and all the stuff that happens when you don't even necessarily do anything that remarkable, but you just put the tools and data in the hands of the world and help the scientists to get access to it, which traditionally has not been particularly great. So that's one of the things we're doing. And then we're also just looking at education. We want to put educational materials out there and, you know, have everything that teachers have chosen to build and share be out there. And we're also hoping to help produce it. And the reason for that, for me, that's really important to me is my mom is a pre-primary teacher, and I've seen her personally pour her heart and soul into getting good quality educational materials to give to her, the children that she taught at school and that she still teaches. And not all of that was reimbursed because she went above and beyond. And I looked at the sorts of things that were acquired, and of course, when you're in pre-primary, you don't have time to make this stuff. But the stuff that you're having to buy in most cases to give to these kids is like shapes and colors and little drawings of animals and things that, you know, a passionate educator, if they had lots of time, would contribute little bits to and hopefully help build. So we want to branch out into actually creating educational materials as well, but have them be vetted and checked out by, you know, actual educators and do all that thing. So we just want to make it cheaper for people to get access to that stuff and not have to spend their own money in order to ensure that the people that they are teaching have a good education and have access to the best things that the world can give them to the best of our efforts, or the best of the teachers' efforts is actually the much more relevant point. So with that, thank you all very, very much. I'm going to launch into the technicals now, but I'll probably pause for just some final questions because I've said a lot of stuff. And the technicals is very unprepared, so it'll be off the cuff. I might actually just ask, what do people want to know about? And then I'll probably just go into a rant about the director and how it actually works. So if you are wanting to head home or you're bored, please go home, enjoy the rest of your night, and thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it. We're just happy you were here in the first place. So are there any more questions now? Or are we pretty much good? And you'll probably have to unmute the microphone so I can actually hear you guys. Okay, well, if you came for the technical, then I'm sorry. But if you email me, if you go to Riff.CC and scroll to the bottom and hit the contact us link, you'll be able to email us. That goes directly to me and my team. But also, if you email Wings at Riff.CC, because as most of you there probably know, I go by Wings, then you will be able to just email me directly, and I will absolutely talk your ear off about any technicals you want to know about, because I have to live and breathe and eat them every day. So please email me. If you just have any questions about Riff, even if they're non-technical, if they're policy, if they're about freedom or culture or even piracy, whatever it is you want to talk about, please just email me, and you'll get on to me. Or if you just want to talk to the rest of the team as well, which is starting to be not just me, if you email team at Riff.CC, that is a catch-all that goes to our team, although we haven't actually brought the entire crew into having email addresses yet, because we just haven't had time yet. So again, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate you all being here to listen to me, and yeah, let's free the world's culture. It feels like it's probably about time, and I just am really, really blessed to have friends and supporters who are working to make my silly little dream from 2009 happen. So there's people in France, some people in Germany, India, Venezuela, the United States, and obviously a ton of people in Australia who are part of this effort. And simply by listening, you are one of them. and that means the world to me. So thank you, and I hope you guys have an awesome night. Cheers.